Next up, we have my top 5 Santas in cinema history. I was gonna put in television as well, but since I mostly do movies for this channel, I figured I would just stick to movies in general. I mean, I was gonna put in the, Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer Santa because he is very quintessential when it comes to Santas, and, I mean, you could say that it was a movie, I mean, you can, but it's less than an hour. When it comes to the story itself, it aired on television, it is a television special, so I kinda left that one out. So everything that we are talking about in terms of Santa for this list will be all movie related. So with that being said, let's jump into my number 5 Santa. David Huddleston, who starred as Santa in Santa Claus the movie 1985, also starred Dudley Moore and John Lithgow. Definitely a movie worth seeing. Probably not the best movie ever, but it is definitely a wonderful film, and the way that Santa is depicted is very wholesome and wholehearted. I really enjoyed this Santa. It's one that I grew up with. Hell, it was the year that I was born, so it's kinda hard not to, look at this fondly since it was one that I grew up, watching every year for and I might watch it this year. It's been a long time since I've actually sat down and watched that movie. I remember it being just wonderful altogether, and that's what made me fall in love with Dudley Moore. When it comes to Dudley Moore, he had this, like, kid-like way about him. He plays an elf, and John Lithgow plays the villain, and, when you have David Huddleston playing, Santa Claus, he just comes off as just being a very jolly, friendly person, much like what Santa needs to be.
Can't they go any faster?
They usually get a year's rest. They're doing their best.
Number 4, my choice is actually Kurt Russell in 2018's The Christmas Chronicles. He brought a cool and different vibe to Santa, and we really haven't seen that sort of Santa before throughout the history of him. It was a Santa that kind of took the vibes from Elvis. And you can see that persona shine in a lot of the musical flair that was going on in the film, and he just had that coolness about him. And I thought, Kurt Russell needs to be on this list. He's just is the king of cool when it comes to Santa Claus in general. So that's why he ended up on my list. He's probably the most newest of the Santas on my list. And I think it's a well-deserved position just because he's different than the majority of Santas that we've had come out prior to him. They always go with the original traditional Santa, being very jolly, very friendly, very noble in the way he comes off. He's a personification of what good is in the world, and definitely enjoyed his take on it. He was all those traditional things that we really love about Santa, but he put on that cool persona on top of it, and that's what really sold it for me.
Live and in person. One night only.
Number 3, Miracle on 34th Street, 1947's Santa Edmund Glenn, which I think he pretty much became a quintessential Santa for several generations. Before the 80s and 90s, it seemed like there wasn't that many Santas that made a massive impact since that Santa in A Miracle on 34th Street back in the 40s. And since then, I think the next Santa, which was probably my 1985 Santa, that was the next one that really hit the map to me. Because Santa wasn't really a character that showed up a lot in cinema between the 50s, 60s, and 70s for some reason. I'm not exactly sure why. It just seemed like a time that Santa wasn't very popular in movies. I mean, he popped up here and there, but he wasn't like a main character like he was in Miracle on 34th Street. And that's why I think he was very much something that kind of became pop culture for a lot of people and became the Santa to beat.
Santa Claus Capusha.
Now, my number 2 choice isn't just one specific movie, but it's actually one specific actor, and that is Ed Asner, who played the character of Santa Claus 8 times throughout his career. But he also did Elf, which he's most known for doing in 2002 starring Will Ferrell, and he also did a sequel to that as a Christmas special that came out 10 years later, the only actor from that movie to come back and reprise his role as Santa Claus. So the guy had a lot of time to refine what Santa is all about in the movies that he's starred in throughout his career, starting way back in the 80s playing the character. But when it came to him playing Santa in Elf, which is what I will probably concentrate more on, he kind of personified what Santa should be if he's more of a fatherly figure, or I should say grandfatherly figure. But he didn't come off as gruff. He came off as somebody that was very trustful and honest, somebody who would be straightforward and tell you exactly what he was thinking in the nicest possible way. He kind of lays down the law in a lot of ways. He has rules and regulations. The elves respect him. His Santa is more of a Law and Order style Chris Kringle than we've seen in other Santa Clauses, but In reality, that's what you kinda need. He is the boss of, Christmas. He is the one that is, in charge of all the happiness for the children around the world during this time of year, so, he has a sternness about him, a gruffness about him, but it also comes off as sweet and a lot of the undertones that, comes across when he's doing his character as Santa Claus, so that's why Ed Asner is number 2 on my list.
Some people, they just lose sight of what's important in life.
Now, my number 1 choice might be a little, controversial to some people, and it might not be to others. It depends on when you were actually raised up, and I was raised up during the '90s. And the most popular Santa at the time, and I think is probably the most popular Santa still playing the character today, is Tim Allen's Scott Calvin, who takes on the role of Chris Kringle in the very first film, The Santa Claus, which came out in 1994. And I love his interpretation of Santa Claus. When he first starts off in the first film, he's somebody who is all about himself. He doesn't care about his child. He doesn't really care about anything that's going on in his life other than his career. Until one day he ends up being whisked away accidentally when Santa Claus falls off his roof and he becomes Santa by putting on the clothing. And ever since then, the character has slowly grown over time. In that first film, we definitely see the kind-hearted Santa that we all wish Santa to be at the very end of it. He becomes the person he needs to be in order to become the guy that goes around and gives all kinds of gifts to everybody, and gives jolly cheer no matter where he goes. I think Tim Allen really personified what Santa needed to be in that era. He was a single dad. He was going through losing his child in custody hearings and whatnot. I can definitely relate to that since I kind of went through the same thing in my childhood with my parents and whatnot. So I guess that's why I kind of gravitate towards it more so than other Santas, I suppose. But when it came to Tim Allen and the character of Santa Claus, it continued on with Santa Claus, the Santa Claus 2 and the Santa Claus 3, as well as a television show that started airing on Disney Plus a few years back. I think they have 2 seasons and they might do a third one probably for next year. But as it progressed, the stories weren't as great as the first one. I think the first one, they caught some magic with that one. And ever since then, they've been trying to catch that same magic and they just can't seem to do it. When it came to the Disney Plus show, the first 2 seasons, it's kind of aimed more towards children than it is the family dynamic. And I was kind of saddened by that. The same with the second and third films. It was a little more friendlier towards the child, like 10-year-old, than I would say the family. When it came to the first movie, I just feel like it was for everybody. Everybody can relate to it in some fashion. I think the second one kind of comes close to doing that, but not as well as that first one. It's just in the third one, I think just forget about that one. It's not that great. I mean, there's some good moments in it, but what I can say is that Scott Calvin, Tim Allen playing the character of Santa Claus, is definitely one worth checking out if you haven't checked out the first film. I think everybody has, though. It seems to be on everybody's Rolodex of Christmas movies when you're going through this holiday season. But it's been 30 years. It's actually the 30th anniversary of the Santa Claus. Let me know, comment below what your thoughts are on this list, and I'd love to know them, as well as what maybe your top 5 or top 3 or top Santa Claus is in general. I'd like to know.